I think the core of our positioning model is this notion of, we call them positioning anchors. And they really, in layman's terms, you could think of them as a reference point that all of your customers would immediately understand, that can be the basis of the rest of the positioning narrative to explain what you do and all that stuff.
Leading and scaling a business isn't hard because you lack ideas. It's hard because your time, your team's time, and your focus get eaten alive by the daily grind. Too many leaders are overwhelmed, under pressure, and bogged down by low-leverage tasks. I've learned this the hard way, scaling Nobody Studios, advising fast-growing startups and Fortune 500s, all while leading multiple ventures at once. I've seen firsthand how even the best executives get buried in meetings, lose strategic visibility, and burn out just trying to keep up. That's why I built the AI Executive Coaching Program, the same frameworks and tools that I've used in my own work to make it more meaningful, better leveraged, and more impactful. We're helping leaders in global businesses get hours back every week, turning chaos into clarity and operating with more leverage than ever before. This isn't theory. This is about identifying the traits you need to unlearn, the tasks pivotal to your success, and the tools that can be built into workflows to optimize your capabilities every day. From transforming meeting scripts into transcripts, into action plans, and spotting performance patterns you can't see on your own, we're upgrading the way executives lead. If you want to scale without losing your edge, let's talk. You'd be surprised how quickly you can lead at a whole new level.
Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast. Today in the Unlearn podcast, we're joined by Anthony Pierri, co-founder of Fletch, a positioning studio that's worked with nearly 500 startups. Now, Anthony has built a reputation for cutting through the noise in a world drowning with vague business jargon. He helps companies unlearn the myths of positioning, like bigger is always better, or just sell outcomes, not features, and instead teaches founders how to clarity and focus on their real strategic advantages. In this podcast, Anthony and I dive into why your homepage is the most important positioning asset you have, not just for customers, but for your team, your board, and even your investors. We explore how positioning is changing in the age of AI and identifying your true champion. The person closest to the problem is actually more powerful than chasing executives with the biggest budget. Anthony also shares practical advice about something many people struggle with, is how to tell people what you do when you don't like talking about yourself. His framework of positioning anchors makes it easier to explain your value without self-promotion and to stand out in a marketplace where search is shifting from Google to AI agents. If you're a founder, marketer, or leader trying to cut through the noise, this episode will help you rethink how you present your company in the world. So let's dive in.
I used to work in churches for about a decade. So my family grew up going to churches, and, just started working in high school, like played in the band on Sunday morning. They'd give me like $50, play guitar. And I was like, this is amazing. This is more money than I've ever seen. Kept doing it, and then did it through college, and then eventually just moved into full-time work for churches. And a lot of the stuff that we would do even then I thought, this doesn't really make sense. And then looking back, now that I have all the vernacular and the business acumen, I could say that I've learned from this part of the world, I can look back and be like, wow, this is kind of the thread since the beginning. And so for example, we were in this church that was in the city of Chicago, and we had two competing messages. One of the main messages was, we are in the city for the city. We want to serve the people of Chicago. And everyone who worked on the staff of the church had to live in the city. And that was one angle. And then we had another angle where we said, we really believe in sending missionaries to other countries. And so we would say, come into the church, we'll equip you, and then we'll send you away. And even back then, I was like, these two things kind of feel like they're at odds, right? Like, people in Chicago were like, great, you're going to be here for us, and all your best people you send to the other side of the world. Like, that doesn't really make sense. Yeah. And vice versa, right? So even back then, I was like, it feels like, and to use language from today, it feels like we have a positioning challenge, right? Is the church really for people in the city, or is it really for sending people across to overseas ministry? And so that was like so long ago. I didn't have any marketing, background or acumen or anything. But even like looking back now, I'm like, oh, those were those types of challenges. And then even going further, knowing like when I moved more into freelance roles and was doing work on the side, the allure of being able to sell any type of service to anyone. And I would, help fund college. I would record music for people. I would make videos for people. I would do all sorts of things in the creative field that were kind of adjacently related, but not really. Every project was different, and every time I would land a new client, I'd be learning skills from scratch. So it'd be very inefficient. And looking back, what I realize now is that it was like the shiny object syndrome of like, I could work on all these different things. That sounds great. I'm expanding my market, right? Bigger TAM. Again, I wouldn't use those terms back then, but it was actually the stuff that was preventing me from building an actual repeatable business would be focusing somewhere and saying, no, I actually just do videos for this type of people or some sort of specialization. And now in the job we have now, it's so much of the work is with startups that have the same challenge. Software, especially in AI, can be infinitely powerful. It can be really flexible. You can add features and functionality, but it's the same underlying marketing challenge of if you do everything for everyone, no one will be able to remember you. No one will be able to refer you, and you'll never quite get off the ground. So the same challenges of me as a freelancer pointing in 10 different directions is the identical challenges that's keeping these startups that are like, we can do these 10 different use cases for these 10 different audiences. Again, a fundamental positioning challenge. So to me, it's like been one learning over time, even in all the various jobs, that when I look back, I'm like, that's why that never worked. And that's why that did work, or whatever it might be, when people did focus and specialize.
Yeah, no, I love this because, like I'm a co-founder of a venture studio, an AI-specific venture studio. We've been going for 4 years now. We're building 100 companies. We've 18 in production. And every single one of them has struggled with how to say who they are, what's unique about them, or even just where they want to start. Because the technology is so expansive, and these people are very, very bright. They're the classic engineers that you're like, can it solve this problem? They're like, yeah. Can it solve this other problem? Yeah, it can solve that too. And right, so which problem are we solving? Well, we're solving them all.
Yeah.
And like, I can't tell you how many times a week I have that conversation. So for someone like yourself who, you just have a natural intuition for this, right? I think one of the things about people that are great at positioning, I always find, is they're just very good at telling simple human stories in very sort of concise and pointed ways that people can get it, and I think the danger with expertise sometimes is that they get trapped in the technicalities of what they're doing. Like I remember we were building a project management platform called Agile Craft. Super bright engineers. You would ask them what they were building, and they'd start talking about graph databases and infinite node, run systems. And I'm like, my God, the phone book is more exciting than this stuff. But their expertise was a limiting factor in their ability to position the product. So, what are some of the things you've become aware of in yourself? And maybe you had to unlearn, as you say, this focus thing started to come into play as you were developing this expertise. But what were some of the other things that you started to notice in yourself about how you had this innate ability, but you could start to teach it to other people and understand systems about what you were doing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to realizing that focus or prioritization is actually a really big strategic advantage.
Yeah.
And understanding that just because a product can solve many problems, on the other side of building our sort of positioning consultancy, you could call it, I now know firsthand what does it take to have a consistent pipeline of people coming for one thing. Where before, it was always kind of vague notion of like, oh, I bet you could build a business around this idea. But now we've, on the backs of having worked with close to 500 companies, that all came inbound. So we don't do any outbound or anything like that. We post content, then people come to us, and we're hyper vigilant about what we offer. It's really just one service delivered in the same exact way for every customer. So to be able to own a little slice of the market, I just now know how much harder that is than I would have previously thought. And so, for example, most people think about, especially in the service industry, they're like, I could do this graphic design project, and I could do this video, editing project. But to stop and ask yourself and think about it, for me, it was like unlearning that it's like, yes, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And really thinking about it like each different service, or to put it back in the software use case land, an AI agent that can solve 10 use cases. It's like, great, maybe we have a customer for a handful of them. What would it take to get 100 or 1,000 more customers coming for that identical use case? And when you frame it like that, it changes things, right? Like, so we'll work with some early stage founders who have not done this. It's their first startup ever. And they came from Google. They got into Y Combinator. Hyper smart people, right? Really, really sharp founders. And they'll say, it's amazing. We've got 5 customers. Maybe they're each paying $100,000 or $200,000. And so we're like, we're doing $1 million. And you're like, awesome. Well, tell me about these 5 customers. Well, one's a big financial services company. One's a big logistics company. One's big e-commerce. We say, awesome. How did you get these customers? And they go, well, I went to college with the guy high up at this e-commerce company. Our VC introduced us to the logistics company. And you say, okay, interesting. So it sounds like all of these came through your personal network. And they're like, yes. I'm like, awesome. Do you have 1,000 more friends from college that you can hit up in e-commerce? And they're like, no, I don't. And I'm like, okay, this might be a challenge. And you look at companies like Palantir. They're selling 10-figure deals, I don't even, maybe even bigger. And what's their go-to-market strategy? The CEO, Alex Karp, is on a plane 40 weeks out of the year, visiting the heads of state that are all in his personal network and slanging these deals. So it's like, yeah, if you have an amazing network, golf buddies, that can get you to $100 million, perfect. If you're like the rest of us that don't, and you're going to have to use good old-fashioned sales and marketing, you have to realize that these are fundamentally different strategies. What it's going to take to get 100 e-commerce enterprises is going to look so different than getting 100 logistics enterprises. The case studies will be different. The use cases will be different. The stakeholders will be different. The problem, the way, and so the other thing too is a lot of people will say the underlying problem is the same. And they abstract away all the details and they say the software is solving disparate tools. Everything's in different places. We consolidate it, let you act on that data. And I'm like, great. You've abstracted away all the details. Try going to market with that message. Do you have disparate tools that are disconnected? Everybody's like, buzz off. I don't want to go away. It has to be framed in the same way. So these really are different segments, different strategies. And like my favorite example was we were sitting down with this guy. He named his 5 people, and he's like, I'm like, well, how are you going to get more customers? He's like, we're hiring an SDR. They start on Monday.
Yeah, we're going to buy them. We've got people who are going to go out and
I said, tell me about
planes and spend millions of dollars to get $10
for sure.
a man.
So I said, tell me about this SDR that you hired. Well, he's right out of high school. We're paying him $50,000 a year. I'm like, awesome. Who's he calling on Monday? You're going to call 50 CEOs of e-commerce companies, and then on Tuesday he's going to call 50 logistics companies, and on Wednesday he's going to call 50 financial services. Do you think this, fresh out of high school, 19-year-old is going to be able to have meaningful conversations across these 5 industries? And then he's like, maybe not. I'm like, there's the challenge. He's like, but the software can help all 5. And I'm like, that's just one little piece of the puzzle.
You have this other statement that I really enjoy called positioning today means identifying your champion. The person closest to the problem, not necessarily with the budget, right? And I think it builds on this point you were just sort of sharing there, right? Like when people try to buy their way out of the problem or they run out of college mates.
Yeah.
But this ability to, find the person closest to the problem, this has always been something I've cared about deeply. It's like I'm a big believer in this sort of 100 true fans idea as well. Like if you can solve a problem really well, as you're describing, for a small number of people who absolutely love it, your chances of being successful with, you know, a greater population is exponentially increased. And yet it's a counterintuitive idea. You know, most people, again, as they're reading the startup manual, is like, go for the big market, the billion-dollar people, the massive TAM, build something for everybody that nobody can understand or use or has no clarity to, and you're going to be fine. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, how you think about finding these person closest to the problem and not necessarily worrying about the budget holder, because so many people in sales, that's all they're thinking about is how do I get to the decision maker?
Yep.
But actually, you know, you win the fans, they become your sales team internally. So talk a little bit about what gave you that insight as you sort of kept developing these ideas.
There's a couple adjacent concepts that I think help make this clear, clarified. And most of our context is companies that are using are selling B2B software.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we're talking sales-led for a lot of cases. They might have a product-led arm, but most of the companies we work with have some amount of sales as part of their growth strategy. So one thing to remember is executive decision makers don't, by and large, shop for software. Right? If you go to a company that's making $50 million a year, and you go to the executive, there was actually a company that we're friends with the founder, and we really like what they do. They're called Winter, and it's Winter with a Y, so WYNTER. And the founder, they've run all these qualitative and quantitative surveys of executives, like, just to see how does buying happen in companies that are doing at least $50 million a year. And what they found was in 13% of the time, an executive is the one who is the champion. On the flip side of that, 87% of the time, it's not an executive. And in almost all these cases, someone very high up will say, we need to solve some business challenge. We think there could be a software angle that could solve it. And then they'll send the minions scurrying to figure out what that is. And they're going to go, right, take the calls with the vendors, you know, and evaluate solutions and read websites and things like that. They are the ones who are ultimately shopping for software. And on the flip side, those people, whether they might not have been the one, like it might not have been an executive mandate, but someone lower down, and the study found that it was actually usually a manager or a director that was most likely to champion a product internally. They would be low enough to the floor where they could see the problem, but they would also have enough clout to be able to get an executive sponsor for the project, that they would say, I'm so excited about this software because it's going to solve these very specific pain points that I'm seeing. They might not be the end user, but they might be a manager of the end user. So they're very close to it. And they have some clout internally to say to you, the software AE, hey, I love your product. You need to help me make a business case to my boss. And now we're working together. So once you've gotten the champion on your side, you can actually build a very specific and targeted business case that will really speak to the unique challenges of the company, right? Because some sort of like generic business case of like, use our platform and your revenue will go up 20%. Like, not everyone is even thinking about revenue. They might be solving different KPIs that matter to them. And you want to co-create the story, the revenue, you know, or ROI story with your AE and the champion internally. So for us, we're like, you should be positioning for the person who actually theoretically is shopping for software, not the person who approves the purchase, because that person is going to be so many levels removed that, you know, like, so let's say a big company's trying to buy Figma, the design tool. You got the CFO, they're sitting at their desk, the purchase order comes in final, they have to sign the final thing. They go, what is this Figma thing? And the person standing there from procurement or whatever is like, oh, it's a design tool. Our designers are going to need it. And they're like, okay, is it going to move the needle at all? Like, they're operating at such a high level of abstraction that, like, they don't care about the fact that Figma's multiplayer or that Adobe was all single. And like, they just need to hear a credible story and they're going to sign off on it. And so the temptation is, like, if the CFO doesn't sign off on it, companies will say, oh no, we need to make it more clear that we can drive revenue in the business. And then the homepage of the website, they put, you know, increase your revenue with Figma. And then all the people, all the real champions are like, what? Like, I'm just trying to figure out if I should use Figma or this other tool or whatever that might be. And you end up speaking way past trying to win over a CFO who's never going to read the homepage of your website. They don't care. And so that's like where you're trying to find these aspects of who really would be the most likely champion to start the conversation, not necessarily end it.
No, it's such great advice. Like I see this endlessly in B2B products, especially. I've made the mistake many times myself, where I always felt like, even when we were building Agile Craft, right, it was a portfolio management tool. So we thought, oh, it's portfolio managers and the CEO are the people who want this information. So let's talk in this very highbrow, executive speak. And yet the users of the product were all the people who were delivery managers, scrum masters, people who were managing the work. And they were under pressure from the leadership team to show their work, to demonstrate their work. And it wasn't until we really sort of recognized that and actually realized the people we were helping were actually, and I love the way you've described it, co-creating with us to create business cases to bring our product in there, that it just took off. We had one tool where you could suck all your data out of Jira into the tool and it would clean it up before you showed it to your boss, so you could look like awesome before you showed them the new tool. It was like the best feature we ever built, because people were, sick of Jira, but they loved the interface of Agile Craft. So we made it a simple data loader and then let them clean it all up before they showed it to their boss. So like, it was the ultimate win-win. And then eventually Atlassian bought Agile Craft for that specific fact.
That's
so
awesome.
All of these things were like really interesting. They felt like hacks, but now they feel so obvious that how did we miss that for so long? And it's a great reminder, because I think, especially you probably see this a lot in B2B. I feel like people love to say, oh no, our buyer is not our user. Mm-hmm. They love to almost like create this sort of level of indirection that oh no, it's harder for us because the people who use our product don't pay for our product.
Yeah.
And, like, to me, that's a bit of a cop-out now, both as I hear what you're saying and just reflect on their own experiences. No, the people that use the product are potentially your champions.
Yeah.
They're the people who are going to help you sell this product if you service them well, if you hear them, if you create with them. And I just think it's a great insight, again, that I read when I was just reading through your content, that a penny really dropped, which I think is just really important.
For sure.
I want to ask you now about just how positioning is changing, right? Like, I can't think of an area that isn't sort of being flipped on its head a little bit at the moment. How people like search for content. I see content I write and publish is just plummeting. SEO search is just plummeting. LinkedIn posts plummeting. Even these platforms are then telling me I need to pay for more awareness and visibility. It's doing my head in. So I'm curious, for someone like yourself who's working on this art of positioning, and helping people find ways that they can raise awareness of what they're doing, both are obviously through paid mechanisms, but also organic and just naturally writing good stuff that resonates with people. So what are the sort of tweaks that you're noticing, or maybe some of the things you've even had to unlearn yourself over the last 6 to 12 months that maybe surprised you?
Yeah. I think the things that have become obvious are the need for focus and really owning and being known for one thing. It's actually getting more and more important than it even was in the past.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
I'll use an example. In the, middle of the last century or so, it was very hard to, if you were going to start a musical, like a band, right? You want to start a band. You want people to know about your songs. What was the path? You would write some songs.
Money.
Spend some money, go to a studio, and then you try to get signed. Exactly. Try to get signed to a record label, and then they push you on the TV or the radio. And so there was a couple groups that were dominating and worth tons and tons of money and very, very wealthy, and everyone knew them. Then the tools to make music, to produce music, to promote music became democratized. All of a sudden, you can make music in your house for almost no money. You can promote it using free platforms like TikTok or Spotify or whatever, where the algorithm is going to send you to potentially thousands, to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. So no more bottleneck where only a couple few get rich. Now everyone kind of can be a competitor. And so what has that done? That's done several different things. One, it's harder to have these big winners, and that effectively it's going to be more difficult to be a huge winner than it was in the old days because there's so much competition. But on the flip side, maybe you're not going to get rich doing music, but you could actually make some money when you wouldn't have been able to before. And I'll give my own band. Me and my friends are in a band. And we make, I would say, hyper-specific music for a very specific group of people. We make, like, you could call it like pop punk or like Blink-182, artists like that. We make that style, but we're making it for people who loved specifically the early 2000s version of pop punk, and who we felt like were underserved by the pop punk of today, because it has changed, it's shifted. There's they added all sorts of new aesthetics and things that are very different from the people who were like my age, who were listening to this in the early 2000s. So we were like, what if we just made early 2000s pop punk music for that specific audience, and we marketed it that way? And so now, and this is not like some massive success story, but a modest success story is on Spotify, we have about 140,000 monthly listeners.
Yes,
several of our songs have multi-millions of streams, and we make roughly from Spotify about three grand a month from checks from Spotify from the streams.
All right, that's a new guitar a year. That's great.
Yeah. So $36,000 a year is not like crazy wealth, but in the old days, we would have made zero. There would have been no possibility for us to make even 36,000. And that is being hyper-specific, focused in one direction. And so I think what we're going to see happen with AI is the same, especially AI with software creation. It's the same dynamic. So like companies like Lovable or Bolt or any of these vibe coding tools that democratize the ability to make software. I think we're going to see the same thing happen over time. There will be less massive multi-conglomerate winners that are like the all-in-one for everything. And you will see many, many small software companies get to modest incomes that are run by maybe one or two or three people, in the same way that now you can have people making music, making a decent little side hustle money. I think it will be the same thing. But because of the breadth of people who are now doing it, you really need to have an angle to stand out. And in the old days, you could have the Beatles be like, oh, we're going to do our poppy stuff, and then we're going to do a psychedelic album, and then we're going to change our genre, because there wasn't that much competition. Now, if you're trying to win all these different markets, there's just exponentially more competition for everything. And so I think with AI, this need to specialize, to be known for one thing. I'll give one last very small story, and I'm a rambling guy, as you can tell.
No, these are good. No, they're very helpful. Yeah.
There was a high school. Well, I went to a smaller high school, maybe like 1,000 people, and friends of ours went to a high school with like 6,000 people. So it was huge. It was like a university. And all the kids in my school were like, I do music or I do football. They all had like something relatively generic that they were known for. In this other school, everyone had like a very specific thing they were trying to get good at. And it would always be kind of weird. Like our one friend was like getting really good at trampolining. So you'd go on trampolines and do all sorts of crazy flips. People would get really good at like a very bizarre instrument, because they're like, how do I stand out of 6,000 students and have people know me? I can't just be like, I'm the football guy, or I play guitar. Like, no, I have to be the trampoliner, or I need to be the guy who plays the harp or something like that, right? So I think it's going to be the same types of dynamics.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, you got to be 3 levels deep in your hobby to help people understand it. But I sort of am agreeing in a way where, again, this is what probably drew me to your work. It's that the internet has so many people out there sharing stuff, what they're doing. but the ability to cut through is, I always remember this, I suppose, one of these famous Steve Jobs videos where he talks about how noisy the world is, and yet what the best thing is having a simple message that people understand. So it brings me to the maybe one of the last two things I want to ask you. Telling people what you do when you don't like talking about yourself. It's, you know, it's one of these things I think people sometimes think it's an inhibitor. It's a bit like the techie people telling me about they've got a portfolio management product, but they want to tell me it's a graph database enabler, and I'm like, I feel like I'm speaking to a robot.
Yeah.
You know, like this ability for people, and again, sometimes this expertise becomes a blind spot where you're so in the weeds, it's hard to explain, or maybe, you know, you've embarrassment, there's things that hold you back from saying, well, what actually is at the heart of what I'm doing here that may sound simple, but sometimes that's actually the magic, is that it. So how have you helped folks sort of get past that a little bit? And not so they're like, you know, flattering themselves, or but you talk about, you know, these ideas of customer-centric stories, or so share a little bit around that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the core of our positioning model is this notion of, we call them positioning anchors. And they really, in layman's terms, you could think of them as a reference point that all of your customers would immediately understand, that can be the basis of the rest of the positioning narrative to explain what you do and all that stuff. So when we work with companies, a lot of times we'll say, well, what do you do? And they'll put it in their terms, right?
Yeah.
We're a data platform. And then we say, okay, yeah, of course, right? As they all are. So then we'd say, okay, if you think about your customers, and we have this visual where it's someone posted on LinkedIn. They were like, we're looking for a positioning expert whose budget under 20K, uses the jobs to be done framework. Who would you recommend? So hyper-specific qualifications. It perfectly matches how we've been positioning ourselves for the last 3 years. So all the comments are like, oh, you should talk to Anthony. You should talk to his company, Fletch. You should talk to Robert, his co-founder. It's all just comment after comment after comment. We're like the only people that get brought up. If that lady had tweaked any words, if she had said, we're looking for a marketing advisor, we wouldn't have come up, right? We're looking for a go-to-market consultant. We wouldn't have come up because of the specificity of that reference point of someone who does positioning was enough that like a customer would actually say it. So sometimes we can tell people, like, what would like if you say you're a data platform, think back to your 10 customers. If they did that post, would they say, I'm looking for a new data platform? And a lot of times they'll say, no, they wouldn't say that. So you say, okay, so you can't use data platform as your reference point because it's not well known to the people you're going after. So what would be the reference point that they would say they're trying to do? And it might be something like, I'm trying to, manage the data from these different, test facilities, or something much more specific to what they're actually doing. So for us, we kind of have these 3 types of reference points that we think are simple enough to form the basis of answering the question, what is your product? And the one is a category, which is very simple. Like if you say, what is your product? You say, we're a CRM. Great. I now understand what you do. Now let's have a value conversation. We could say, well, interesting. Well, what makes you different than Salesforce? What makes you different than HubSpot? So just naming a category. Again, it has to be a category that they know. Because if I say data platform, and it can't be a reference point unless they know what the category is. So category anchor is like a really strong answer to what is it, and opens the door to have a value conversation. The second one is sometimes you're in a new or nascent category that people don't know. And we would say it's better to just say the specific use case or workflow that your product supports. So, I think we booked this call maybe with Calendly or a tool like it. Calendly, their initial positioning, they did not say, we're the best scheduling tool on the market. Because when they launched, there was no category scheduling tool. If they said, we're the best scheduling tool or we're a scheduling tool, people would say, what do you mean, like Google Calendar? Like, well, no, not really. So Calendly can't use a category anchor because they're not in a well-known category. So what they did was they anchored on the use case. They said, oh, if you met someone from Calendly at a networking event, what is Calendly? Oh, we help people schedule meetings over email. They just listed the workflow. Again, they're not pitching at this point. They're just saying, what is it, by using a use case reference point. Now people say, well, interesting. How do you do that? Or I send emails back and forth. Why would it be better to do it with you? And now we're having a value conversation. So you've got the category anchor, you got the use case anchor. And then the last one is if maybe your product solves many use cases and it doesn't really fall in a category. What you can do is you can take an adjacent alternative, we call it the alternative anchor, and say we're an alternative to this thing that you know. So Slack is a great example. If you say Slack, when they went to market, they said Slack replaces email in your business. So Slack's not an email client, but they replace email. They cover the same use cases that you would use email, and they were able to get clarity by saying, well, you guys have email, right? And they're like, yeah, well, we're sort of a replacement to that. Oh, interesting. What makes you different than email? And now we're having a value conversation. Another example of the alternative anchor is Airbnb. If I said to you, Barry, what's the product category of Airbnb?
Oh, God. I feel this is when we're straight away. I'm like, right?
Exactly, right? So no real category name. Their whole strategy since day one has been we're an alternative to hotels. Don't stay in a hotel, stay in an Airbnb. And so for them, they're like, we cover the same use cases of a hotel. Hotels have many use cases, right? Business, leisure, vacation, all sorts of reasons you would use a hotel. Airbnb can cover all the same ones. But that's a simple heuristic to be like, hey, what is Airbnb? Oh, we're an alternative to hotels. Interesting. What makes you different than, and now we can have the value conversation. So for us, like getting people to pick an anchor, whether it's one of those three types, is really the main basis of building a powerful positioning narrative. Because then you can say, hotels, they make your whole family stay in one room, right? Kids go to bed, you got to go to bed. And there's the funny thing is Airbnb to this day is still running those ads. Like even though they're, this massive company, all the YouTube videos that they run, ads that I get all the time are like, you don't want to have everyone, like, what if you could give the whole house? And so you're able to frame the value in relation to a reference point that the customer knows by highlighting the problems with that reference point to then build, why are you a better solution?
Yeah, and it's, even just listening to you as you share these examples, there always feels like when you land it, the next thing I want to ask is tell me more.
Yes.
And that's a really, really interesting place to get someone to when they just read a set of positioning words, where they go through this and as you're describing their anchors, it's creating a mental model in their head that's inspiring them to go, I need to know more. And that is, again, like for me, that's the ultimate sort of placement of a call to action inside someone's mind.
Yeah.
By simply communicating what you're about, why you're different, what these anchors are that you're describing. It feels like a eureka moment for a customer if you can make them feel like that.
And to the same point, right? One way that people have gotten off track on this in the last, let's say 10, 15 years is we have this giant movement in B2B marketing where people, a lot of times because they're pitching to a CEO who is not shopping for a product, they say, people don't care about the product. Nobody cares about the product. They don't care about your features. They just care about an outcome. And so people have said, we don't even need to do the hard work to give any reference point at all. We can just tell people we're going to increase their revenue and then they'll buy. And it's a faulty assumption. And we've used examples. There's a company, I won't say the name, and I'll even just read it to you. This is the H1 H2 combo of a company, and you tell me if you want to buy this, because this is following that advice. People don't care about products; they just want outcomes, right? So their H1 on the website says, "Put yes to work," and then the H2 says, "Save or grow, satisfy shareholders or satisfy customers. When facing tough choices, choose the one platform that lets you say yes to both." And then the little CTA says, "Make yes work." And I'm like, you ready to buy? And you're like, what is it? And I'm like, nobody cares about the product. They just want the outcome, right?
I'm
Don't
not
you want to
saying
buy?
tell me more after.
You're not saying tell me more. But if you think about it, I just hit you with 5 business outcomes. You're going to save. You're going to grow. You're going to satisfy shareholders, satisfy customers. You get to do it all at once. Like I gave you 5 business outcomes, but you you really care about what it is. You're going to say, I kind of need to know what it is before I'm going to buy it. And I'm like, no, people they don't want the 1/4-inch drill. They want the 1/4-inch hole. And like, they
Exactly.
talk in all these marketing
Yeah, yeah.
truisms. Don't sell the product, sell the transformation. It's like, great. It might actually matter at some point to say what the thing is. Right?
All right. Well, this brings me to like the last bit, which I guess is one of your pillars and certainly your calling cards. The homepage is your most important asset, right? And I think you've just exemplified a classic example of maybe how not to do a H1 and H2 on your homepage. But you've written so many great things about this space, and again, I really encourage everybody go look up your work. It's great, and you're very open about sharing it. And the Fetch website is brilliant and packed with just tons of examples, which I always love for people when they're trying to learn these things. So, tell me a little bit about, often, the homepage is often the only asset that your prospects and your team and your board consistently see, right? I look at my website stats all the time. The homepage is constantly in the top 4 pages. It doesn't matter how many blogs I write, how many podcasts I do, people still go to barryriley.com. That's what they do. That's where they go looking for stuff. And off they go. If they can understand what the hell it is I'm trying to get them to go, tell me more about. Which again, after this, I'm going to put on goggles and cry at my website, which is going to be so super fun activity on an afternoon. But tell us again, you've great structures around how to do this. And what I really like about the way you teach it to people is it feels like it's unfolding. It feels like, people are sort of, again, going down these orders of information where they're taking steps and learning the context. And then, at any point, there's always the option to go, okay, I've got enough information. Now I need to do the thing. I need to say yes to whatever that button
Make
was.
yes work.
So, talk about how you came to this conclusion, right? Like what were your experiments along the way back from the 2 different signs that you're either going to see the world or you're going to be stuck in downtown Chicago? Like how did you start to solve this ambiguity?
Yeah. So back to your original point, right? Homepage is extremely important. We would say the homepage is even important for people where the homepage is not actually viewed that much. So we'll get pushback. Well, we were sales led. People don't even really go to the homepage, and we're making a slightly different argument. While I do think in most companies it is the most viewed asset, even in companies where it's not, I actually still think it's the most important because of the point you made, accessibility, right? So when we were starting, we were like, we want to do positioning work. We loved the foremost positioning expert in our field, April Dunford. We read her book,
April's
right?
great, yeah.
She's super sharp, and we're like, well, maybe we could be like, the B tier April Dunford. And so we
I
started the business.
think you're up there with her. You're doing pretty good. I'm sure she loves your work. Yeah.
So we start doing positioning, and what we found is that a lot of April's output tends to lend itself to the sales conversations, which we think is really important and could really move the needle and drive, results really quick. Because if the sales team gets it going, that's going to make a lot of stuff happen. But what we found is that solving a slightly different challenge of if the sales team has a narrative, and this is not to say anything wrong with April's model, I think she's doing great work, but if the sales team has the narrative, how do you get that visible to the rest of the company, right? And so a lot of times there'll be some sort of positioning deck or positioning doc that's like the Bible for everyone to follow, but it's not very accessible. It's tucked away in a Microsoft SharePoint or in
totally,
Google Drive, whatever.
Where it's just goes to die, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You're like, didn't we do a positioning workshop? Didn't we
we spent $50,000 on it as well. It was great. A great deck, good color logos. It looked amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing, but it's not very accessible. So for us, we're like, to raise your chances without doing true enterprise change management work, which I think sometimes needs to happen. But if you're not going to do that, your next best option would be to say, let's make some decisions about positioning and let's put them front and center on the homepage. Because then employees will easily be able to look at the website of the business they work for and be like, oh, that's what we do. Investors can look at the website. Customers can look. It's just one URL type away. Your friends will see it, right? Give you an example. There's a publicly traded company called Klaviyo. You're probably familiar. Klaviyo was positioned as an email marketing platform for e-commerce. Then recently they did a big repositioning project, and the homepage switched, and it said the first CRM built for B2C companies, something along those lines. So big shift from email marketing category to CRM category, shift from e-commerce segment to B2C. Now you can imagine if they had made that huge strategy shift in a boardroom, it was in a deck, it got disseminated out to the employees, everyone start calling ourselves the CRM for B2C. And then a salesperson gets on a call with someone, it's not on the website, so the person comes on and they say, I'm looking for an email marketing platform. We're an e-commerce company, we heard you're the place to go. The salesperson then has two choices in that moment. They've got a quota that they're living up to. They can either say, actually, you've got the wrong idea about us. We're not an email marketing platform. We're a CRM. And I know you guys are e-commerce, but we're really for B2C. Or the salesperson can say, yep, you're in the right place. That's exactly what we are. Right? Which one do you think they're going to do? I think they're going to go with the old one, as most people would suggest.
I think it's bonus season, so I think they're definitely doing it.
And so then, but let's flip it. Now you put it on the homepage, the prospect books the demo and says, so I saw that you guys are this like a CRM for B2C. Can you tell me more? And now the salesperson has to deliver that thing, right? They got to deliver the narrative. So for us, we're like, get it right on the homepage, and then it's going to help align your company because people are going to have to reason with it. It's like putting it up on the door. Like, I don't think this was the right decision. And this is not a homepage, but an even crazier thing is like when Facebook rebranded to Meta, right?
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg is like, I'm going all in on the metaverse. I'm rebranding. I'm renaming the company to Meta. You're like, that's going to force everyone to think about it in those terms. I'm not suggesting you go that far, but at the same point, because I think it didn't really pan out. Metaverse kind of.
Well, he's managed to rebrand his entire life as a UFC fighter in disguise. So hey, he's done a
now
lot
he's
of work.
a cool guy. Right? He was a nerd, and now he's cool. That was his big rebrand, right? But yeah, so in general, then if you get behind that idea of like forcing us to get alignment enough that we'd put it on the website, because the other thing too is homepages are the most consensus building exercise in a bad way.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
every team wants their thing.
Great.
Exactly. Everybody wants their thing up there. Everyone wants it to be represented. You end up with this wishy-washy thing. To really make a decision of like, no, we're calling ourselves CRM now. The folks who had been in the email marketing side of the house might be pretty upset about that, but some strong leader at Klaviyo said, no, we're going to do this because we think there's more opportunity in that category for that segment, and pushes it through. And then from like a structure perspective, we do try to say it should mirror kind of that flow of we were talking about. Hit them with the functional description. This is exactly what we do using those anchors. Bring in what is your real differentiation. Like I think Calendly's H1 was schedule meetings without the back and forth emails. So it was like in one little phrase was like, this is the problem we're solving. And then it would explain how you did it better below.
Yeah.
And we and then basically having those sections walk it out. And one of our kind of pillar things, not every company likes this and it doesn't always make sense, but we love a dedicated problem section, which is like, here's the problem. And it mirrors what you would say in a sales conversation, right? So you have the description of what we do, high level differentiation, a problem slide, and then here's how we solve it. And you can go into some product highlights or whatever that might look like below.
Yeah, no, it's great. And like for everything I'm spending my time building pitch decks to whatever, I just think the way you help people unfold that information is fantastic. Listen, it's been as much fun. I've laughed as much in this podcast as much as I've learned, Anthony. Listen, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing so much about your own lessons learned, what you've unlearned, what you've tried, what you continue to do. Look, I highly recommend everybody go check out Fletch. Awesome. Go follow you on LinkedIn and all good these platforms. You're putting loads of great content out, and thanks again for spending some time and sharing some knowledge with us.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.